Matthew chapter 16, verses 13 through 16. Now when Jesus came to the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" And they said, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and others Jeremiah or one of the other prophets." And he said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" And Simon Peter replied, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." It was in northern Israel that an ancient city was discovered underneath all the overgrown weeds and brush. This city was thriving during the time of Christ. The city was called Omrit. In this city, on a main Roman road between Damascus and Capernaum, a huge limestone temple was built by Herod the Great. And he built this temple to honor the deity of Caesar Augustus. The ruins of the columns of the temple declare that Caesar Augustus is God. Herod built 3 such temples to the deity of Caesar, one here at Omrit, another overlooking Jordan's Mediterranean coastline, and a third just 3 miles away from Omrit at Caesarea Philippi. Each of these temples was a grand building positioned in a most prominent place. Each was made of the finest stones, usually having to haul them in from miles and miles away, and built with such spectacular craftsmanship. Each one proclaimed the Roman emperor as God on earth. This temple at Omrit set the stage for the discourse that Jesus was going to have with his disciples. Just minutes after walking by this temple, Jesus and his disciples stood at Caesarea Philippi with the second temple to Caesar in the backdrop. Caesarea Philippi was basically a smorgasbord of pagan gods. It was the home of the god called Pan. It had a history with the gods of Baal and Asherah. Those were gods famous during the time of Elijah. The Greeks brought a boatload of gods with them, and the Romans added to the mix with the deity of the emperor. Peter and the other disciples must have felt terribly uncomfortable in this place, in the midst of all these gods. But it was in this setting that Jesus turned to his disciples and asked them the most important question he could ever ask them. If a man could be the Son of God, who would that be? Well, the emperor, he had expensive buildings and temples built in his name. He had a growing number of followers claiming him to be the Son of the God. Jesus, he had no temple. He had no building. But his resume was packed with amazing supernatural things that only God could do. It was here, within the sight of one of the most expensive buildings in the world, in a land that proclaims Caesar Augustus to be the God-man, that Jesus drew the line in the sand. After all this time with Jesus, he wanted to know if his young followers fully understood all that they had seen and all that they had experienced. After all, only one could actually be the only begotten Son of God. Augustus or Jesus? Who do people say that the Son of Man is? Well, the disciples had answers. All of them were very complimentary to Jesus. John the Baptist, Elijah, Jeremiah, one of the other prophets. That was nice. But what about the question that was begging for an answer? Only now, in the shadow of these pagan temples, would Jesus push for an answer from his disciples. But what about you? Who do you say that I am? Simon was the first to speak up. He said, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Surrounded by all these man-made gods and the view of a temple honoring a mere man to be divine, Simon proclaimed Jesus to be the Son of the living God. As speaker for the group, Simon expressed what the others had come to believe as well. Jesus was so pleased with Simon's response that he gave him the nickname Peter. There's no doubt that Peter and the other disciples ever forgot that question on that day, in that place, surrounded by pagan gods. Now that they settled on this very important question of who Jesus is, Jesus goes on in verses 24 through 27 to help them understand what it means to follow him, what it means to be his disciple. And then Jesus told his disciple, "If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake, he will find it. For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul? Or what shall a man give in return for his soul? For the Son of Man is going to come with his angels in the glory of the Father, and then he will repay each person according to what he has done." You know, it was now time for the 12 to make a decision. You know, it's much like the decisions we have to make throughout life. You know, in a dating relationship, when do we end the relationship? Or do we make a lifelong commitment to the other person? Considering college, do I go to this college or do I go to that college? You can only choose one. Do I remain in the place where I am right now? Or do I go somewhere else because of a job? Or because of being closer to a family? Or just in retirement? You can't live in both places and thrive. Life demands that we make decisions every day. So we shouldn't be shocked when Jesus demanded a choice from his disciples and demands a choice from us when it comes to following him. You can follow the mandates of culture which lives without a God, or you can follow Jesus. You can sample the smorgasbord of world religions and come away with the conclusion that all of them are equally valid. Or you can believe that Jesus Christ is the only way to God. You can try to live with Jesus in one pocket and the world in the other pocket, or you can make a decision to make Jesus the passion of your life and give him your entire life. Now, had you been alive during those times, what would you have done? Would you have surrendered to calling the emperor Lord in order to avoid severe punishment or even be putting to death? Or would you have refused to give an offering to Caesar, preferring instead to take up your cross and declare Jesus Christ as the one and only Lord? What about right now? What about where you are? Are you living a passion for Jesus? So much so that you're committed to following him in discipleship and willing to accept any punishment or penalty for living a life demonstrating Jesus as Lord of Lords? It's time for you to answer that question. Who is Lord in your life? Who do you say that Jesus is?